When you think about late-era original PlayStation racers, a few giants tend to dominate the conversation. Wipeout XL, Gran Turismo, you know, the icons. But nestled somewhere between anti-gravity racing and, well, real racing, sits one of the strangest, most charmingly misguided combat racers of the late 90s. S.C.A.R.S, which, by the way, stands for Super Computer Animal Racing Simulation. Huh? Welcome to the Worst Racing Games, the internet series where you guys suggest different racing games that you think are terrible, then I play them, review them, and rank them. Last week we played the, in my opinion, quite underrated My Sims Racing, which was a nice break from some terrible racing games. And yes, this week the wheel has chosen us S.C.A.R.S, and I'm not going to read that abbreviation again because that's just ridiculous. So, S.C.A.R.S was developed by Vivid Image and was published by Ubisoft, releasing across the PlayStation, Nintendo 64, and PC, launching across late 1998 and early 1999 across those three different platforms. Anyway, so let's boot up this futuristic game and see what happens when hyper-intelligent supercomputers, well, get bored. S.C.A.R.S opens up with one of those late 90s sci-fi setups that feels equal parts sincere and completely, absolutely ridiculous. In the next millennium, Earth is ruled by colossal supercomputers. Like ChatGPT, I guess. These machines evolve beyond simple logic, they've developed awareness, emotion, and eventually, yeah, they got bored. And what do bored, omnipotent supercomputers do? Well, they create a virtual reality racing league featuring animal-themed combat cars that kind of look like Hot Wheels. Naturally, what else would you do? The supercomputer animal racing simulation becomes their chosen form of entertainment. It's like a holodeck-style battleground, kind of like something you'd expect to see in, like, Star Trek. It's a pretty cool setup, to be honest. I mean, is it absolutely stupid? Yes. But is it memorable? Also yes. In an era when racing games either leaned hard into realism or went full cartoon chaos, S.C.A.R.S has kind of landed somewhere in between. It's self-aware, but it's not quite a parody. So you begin the game with 5 selectable vehicles: Mammoth, Lion, Rhino, Mantis, and Shark. I'm absolutely certain there is a Hot Wheels car that looks identical to that Shark car. Each one represents a classic arcade racing trade-off, like speed versus armor, versus grip, versus weapon capacity. If you want raw speed, then you'll gravitate toward the Mantis or Shark. They're nimble, fast, and fragile, but they may be harder to control. You'll zip down straightaways, but one well-placed missile, and you're pretty much dead. If you prefer brute force, then the Mammoth or even Rhino are your tanks. They're slower, heavier, but they can absorb punishment and dish it out in return. And then there's the Lion, which is just the middle ground for someone who can't really decide what they want to do. Like me. It's a smart setup, to be honest. Simple, readable options that make it easy to experiment and find your playstyle. Eventually, as you win championships, you can unlock challenges to take on some additional vehicles to unlock for yourself. Scorpion, Cheetah, Cobra, and Panther. And this is kinda where the game's difficulty curve spikes very hard. So the core experience of the game is Grand Prix mode, which is divided into a few main cups, plus a customizable cup that can stretch up to 8 races of your choice. That's a solid amount of content for a late 90s racer. Win a cup and you'll unlock the next one, along with a one-on-one duel against one of the unlockable vehicles which I mentioned just a moment ago. Beat them and the car joins your roster. Simple in theory, but kinda brutal in practice, to be honest. The AI in S.C.A.R.S is aggressive. They are relentless with weapons, they don't seem nearly as affected by terrain as you are, they recover a lot quicker from hits, and in later cups, they can feel almost unfair. There's a distinct sense that the CPU plays by slightly different physics rules. On rough terrain or during tricky drifts, they'll maintain speed in ways that make you question your own understanding of the track and how the game actually works. It's not rubber banding in the Mario Kart sense, but it feels like quiet favoritism from the game. And yet it's kinda compelling. I was restarting races, honestly I was getting pissed off, and was swearing that the AI just ignored patches of mud entirely, but when I did finally win, it does feel earned. But did it have to be that difficult to begin with? I don't know, I guess that's up to you. One of S.C.A.R.S' strongest elements, in my opinion, is the track design. There are 9 primary courses, and they cover a pretty impressive range of environments, from Aztec temples to ski resorts to cities. This variety does a lot of heavy lifting for the replay value. Although personally, the ski resort was an absolutely horrible track, and I tried it with a few different cars and I just couldn't seem to get the drifting around corners right. Because it's all snow, you're just sliding around so much more than you do on other tracks. Anyway, personal gripes aside, the track variety is cool. It's just a shame that the game doesn't utilize this so early on, because in the first cup, there are 3 races, 2 of which for some reason are on the same track. The first one is the Aztec Temple, then you do another track, and then you go back to that Aztec Temple. It's the exact same layout, except it's just a bit darker because it's nighttime. That's the only difference. In my opinion, it kind of leaves a bit of a sour taste in your mouth as a first impression, because it makes the game feel kind of cheap. You know, having 2 of your 3 tracks for your first cup be the same track doesn't really sell the game too well. And first impressions are really everything in the video game world. So let's address it directly. The handling in this game isn't amazing. It's functional, yeah, sure, sometimes it can even feel satisfying, but it's never truly great. Power sliding is essential, especially on rally-style tracks. You'll be feathering the brake and steering into turns constantly, and there is a learning curve to managing grip, especially with the faster, lighter vehicles. And it's a learning curve for those lighter vehicles that I never quite managed to grasp. Heavier cars feel more planted, obviously, but sluggish, and lighter cars feel twitchy. The problem is that the physics don't always feel consistent. Certain terrain types exaggerate awkwardness, sharp turns can sometimes feel like you're fighting the controller, rather than mastering it, and there's also parts of the environment that you do sometimes just clip on, even when you feel like you shouldn't. That said, for the most part, once you adjust expectations and learn the car's quirks, it can kind of click. Not in a silky precision way, sure, but in a scrappy arcade survival kind of way. And in a combat racer, I guess that's enough. It's not the best, but it's certainly not the worst we've seen in this series. Now, as I mentioned, this is a combat racer, so of course there's going to be weapons and power-ups, and they are scattered across the tracks as glowing icon-based pickups. You've got your obvious staples like missiles, shields, boosts, but S.C.A.R.S also introduces some relatively creative ideas. Magnet traps that freeze you or your opponents in place, energy barriers you must jump over, and the infamous skull bomb, which is counting down from the minute you pick it up, and you can pass it onto an opponent, but they can also pass it back to you right before it explodes, so you don't have time to pass it on. So the best thing to do is just let the countdown go to like 1 and immediately press the item button to pass it on, and then there's no chance of you getting blown up. And to be fair, those moments are chaotic and can be quite funny. You'll see the bomb icon switch cars multiple times in the final seconds before detonation. It's one of those mechanics that kind of feels ahead of its time in terms of party game design. It encourages proximity and risk, and it's kind of like a mind game sometimes. For a relatively niche 1998 original PlayStation title, I would say that S.C.A.R.S actually looks quite impressive. The textures are varied, the lighting effects, especially the headlights during night races, are pretty good. Rain and environmental effects add some atmosphere. But the real standout is how the game handles draw distance and pop-in. Because the entire racing league is set inside a virtual reality simulation, whenever the hardware struggles to render distant geometry, the world briefly displays a blue wireframe grid. It's framed as the simulation building the environment in real time. And honestly, that's such a genius workaround. Instead of immersion breaking pop-in, you get a lore-consistent visual effect. It rarely appears on the actual racing surface, so it doesn't really disrupt gameplay, but it's a smart creative workaround to technical limitations, which is something I don't think has been spoken about enough for this game. As well as being pretty impressively visually designed, the sound design is actually also quite good. The soundtrack is good. Each track has its own distinct theme that matches the vibe it's going for, like the Aztec Temple. It's all decent, it's just not groundbreaking, but it certainly fits the aesthetic of each track, so that's a win in my books. It's not as iconic as some other licensed soundtracks in racing games, but it complements the races well and keeps momentum up. Sound effects are punchy, the explosions have weight, weapon activations are distinct enough to signal danger. The engine noises are less memorable, but they still work, so overall, it's a solid audio package. S.C.A.R.S is just a weird game because it never became a flagship franchise, it didn't even redefine combat racing or dethrone the giants. But it represents something really interesting about the late PlayStation era. Studios were experimenting, blending genres, trying weird and wild concepts. Like Ubisoft, long before massive open worlds like Assassin's Creed, were willing to greenlight a combat racer about sentient supercomputers staging animal-themed virtual reality tournaments. That kind of risk feels rarer now, and while it's not a masterpiece, I'd say this game is definitely memorable and has personality. So in terms of critical response, the game did not have enough reviews on Metacritic to get a Metascore, but on the now defunct website Game Rankings, the original PlayStation version held a 67% out of 100, which makes sense in my eyes. Unfortunately, this game would not sell very well, having sold approximately 80,000 units across its lifespan, and those figures are from VG charts. So now the time has come to rank S.C.A.R.S on our worst racing games tier list. Honestly, I actually kind of enjoyed my time with S.C.A.R.S. It's not a perfect game by any sense, but I was really impressed on a technical level. The handling is kind of meh, and the AI are brutal. So for me, the game is going to sit in the meh category, just below actually not that bad. But I'm going to move it right up to the top of meh, because if the AI were a little bit fairer and the handling worked just a little bit better, then I would have put this up in the bottom of actually not that bad. Because stupid premise or not, S.C.A.R.S actually has a lot going for it. A creative theme, varied track designs, some clever technical tricks, and a good soundtrack. It's not incredibly deep, and the handling isn't great, and the AI can be sickening, but there's still some fun to be had here. It kind of occupies that strange middle ground, too weird to be mainstream but too competent to be forgotten. And in the crowded garage of PlayStation racers, sometimes that's enough to earn it a second look. And if nothing else, it answers one very important question. When ChatGPT finally gets bored, we now know that instead of turning into Skynet from Terminator, it's just gonna create S.C.A.R.S, so that's alright. And so that takes us to the end of our look at S.C.A.R.S, and with it this week's episode of Worst Racing Games. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of this game? Would you rank it any differently? And as always, if you have any suggestions to add to the wheel of suggestions, well, let me know as well. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe and tap that bell for notifications. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thank you, and bye bye.
Decelerating. Slow gravity. Too slow.